Dear guests, the event is now in session. Thank you. ضيوفنا الأعزاء ستبدأ الجلسة الآن. شكراً.
Hello, good morning everyone. Thank you for being with us today. This conference is a part of Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi COP28 program and is a testament to the engagement of the university for sustainability and climate change. We will start the session today about Indigenous perspective and how to integrate them in higher education curricula with Dr. Beatrice, organizer of the conference, and she will be moderating the session. I just want to inform you that we will have 2 more speakers joining us in a couple of minutes, so we will just have them sitting in the middle of the session. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Manon. Good morning. On behalf of Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi, I'm very glad to welcome our speakers today and our participants here. Thank you so much for coming. So I will start introducing our speakers, and it's my honor to introduce Professor Brendan Mackey, who is the director of Griffith Climate Action Beacon at Griffith University in Queensland, Australia. I had the honor to work with Professor Brendan in a large primary forest project, and probably you can talk more about it, Brendan. And also Cássio Inglês Souza. Cássio is an anthropologist. He has a consultancy called Contexto, and he has been working with indigenous communities in the Brazilian Amazon for several years. So he will be talking about his experience with that work. And we'll also be having 2 indigenous leadership coming. When they come, I'll introduce you to them. So we'll now start with Professor Brendan Mackey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beatrice. Is that microphone working? That's good. I got a bit of a croaky voice, so I need the mic today. So I'm just going to quite quickly go through some slides. So we often forget those of us who are urbanised, just how many Indigenous people there still are in the world. Many of them do live in urban centres, but of course many of them are living in their ancestral homes throughout the world, throughout the world's ecosystems. And there was a recent report which estimated the global population at about 476 million globally. And we know we face a climate crisis, and that this is made worse by the emissions from deforestation and degradation. And we also know we face a biodiversity extinction crisis with extinction rates 1,000 times more the background rate. But we also face a cultural diversity and knowledge extinction crisis too, associated with the traditional custodianship and management of the land. That knowledge is also facing a crisis as well. And Indigenous people are about 6% of the global population, but speak about 60% of the world's 7,000 languages, of which about 90% are threatened with extinction. So if you think about the knowledge contained within that language, we actually have a biocultural extinction crisis. So traditional knowledge is very important. It provides insights into solutions, ways of living and development pathways, which we need to think about a more just, sustainable and peaceful world. I want to say something quickly about traditional knowledge and to illustrate a point I'm going to make later about the importance of co-design. This actually came from a paper I co-wrote with a traditional custodian owner from Cape York Peninsula. That's his country there. It's the Kuku, Kiyu, Northern Kanju, Nachi is the traditional name. His name was David Claudy. And unfortunately, I'd been working with David for a long time, maybe 20 years, and he died about 4 weeks ago, completely unexpectedly. So I really want to mention that and kind of honour his memory today. Of course, what I learned from him was we wrote this paper together, and I asked him, well, what's your definition of traditional knowledge, right? And this is what he told me. He said, from the perspective of Kuku, Tiyu, Northern Kanju, traditional knowledge includes cosmology and sacred knowledge, including knowledge of governance, social arrangements, and the relationships between people and tracts of land, belief and taboos that inform our ethical system, knowledge of natural history, including ecological relations of plants, animals, their habitats, ecosystem dynamics, land and water resources, climate and weather, natural resource use and management regimes, including fire management, which is particularly important in this part of the world, cultural heritage, including oral history of Indigenous peoples' experiences of European contact and forced removals, cultural practice, including ceremonies, management of knowledge. He argued an important component of Indigenous management is the management of information about it, which is done through oral and ceremonies and the like. And David argued that if we really wanted to integrate Indigenous perspectives into educational programs, this needed to be done through co-design, and it needed to be based upon and reflect what he saw as core Indigenous values, which can be summarised in terms of reciprocity, right relationships and caring for country. So for Indigenous Australians, the word they use for their ancestral lands for which they have responsibility is, they call it country, and they refer to their traditional obligations to country as caring for country. So we argue there were kind of 4 points of contact that can help bridge traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge in helping address the biocultural crisis. This concept of post-normal science, which many of you would be familiar with that epistemology, that a reductionist kind of physicism view of science is inadequate to deal with these real-world problems, and that the knowledge of practitioners needs to be brought into the solutions, helping us kind of understand and redefine our conservation values and goals, especially in a time of climate change and great disruption, approaches to sustainable management of land and seas, and and actually informing our understanding of what we mean by sustainable development. So I want to suggest that when we think about how we can incorporate Indigenous perspectives into our educational programs, I recommend what in Australia we call the two toolbox approach, where we incorporate and draw upon both modern academic, scientific, humanities knowledge systems and Indigenous traditional knowledge systems, as I've previously defined, to understand problems and identify solutions that are culturally and ecologically appropriate, acceptable and sustainable, and I would add place-based. They're the two toolboxes there. It has been suggested to me by another Aboriginal Australian that rather than having a metal toolbox, I should have a basket, and that a basket of traditional knowledge would be more appropriate than a metal toolbox. She was fine with the modern science having a metal toolbox, but she suggests I replace the box with a basket, a hand-woven basket, which I will do for the next time I talk about this. I'll stop there. That's a slide about the Kaiapo, but we might hear more of that from the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Brendan, for your insightful presentation. We'll hopefully have more time to hear about that project and more about our experience in the Q&A session. I'll now invite Cássio to talk about his experience in the Brazilian Amazon. Thank you, Cássio.
Good morning, everyone. Bom dia for the Brazilian ones. Well, my name is Cássio, and I would like to thank University of Sorbonne and in the name of Dr. Beatriz. And I would say, as a non-Indigenous, I won't talking about an Indigenous perspective, but it's a perspective about Indigenous people with whom I've been working for the last 30 years as an anthropologist. So how can university help Indigenous peoples and Indigenous fights? I was talking about Brazilian reality, but maybe we can make some parallel comments with other countries. So let's talk about Brazilian reality. For the last maybe few decades, we have a lot of improvements in the Indigenous rights in Brazil. We have a new constitution, 1988. We have a specific chapter about Indigenous rights. And the articles 231, 232 recognize some specific rights, such as self-determination, full citizenship, recognition of the Indigenous languages, social organization, and cultural diversity, rights to the lands, this is very important, as an originary right. That means that the rights of Indigenous people to the lands is before the Brazilian state. This is very important in our new constitution. And also right to the environmental quality. So this is a Brazilian reality, but it's similar to what we have in the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples' Rights and ILO 169 Convention. In practical terms, after our constitution, we have some very practical improvements, such as we finish the governmental approach, the tutelage that you used to have in Brazil towards Indigenous people. That means that before our constitution, the Brazilian state was responsible to respond by Indigenous people. They didn't have these rights. So after 88, they had the full citizenship, it's very important. They have the rights to the land demarcation, such as the Kaiapó territory in the Brazilian Amazon. So nowadays we have like almost 800 indigenous lands in Brazil that covers 120 million hectares all over Brazil. It's like 13% of Brazilian territory. We have some specific public policies such as health, education, and land environmental management. That is very important. We have the emergence of indigenous organizations. We have Engajamundo here. I hope the guys will be able to arrive here and talk a little bit about their work. We have, for 20 years now, the indigenous peoples meet in Brasilia, our capital, for the Free Land Camp. That is a very important event for them. And we now, from the beginning of this year, we have a ministry. And our minister, Sonia Guajajara, is very active on the COPs. They were here with a very large team of the ministry. So we have a lot of concrete improvement. And also, talking about university, with affirmative policies, we have nowadays around 100,000 indigenous students or post-graduation, etc. If we come back 40 years later, maybe just a few. In one or two hands, we can count how many indigenous students we had. Well, despite this improvement, these achievements, we have many challenges and threats. The lands, Professor may talk about the logging and illegal mining invasion on Kayapo lands, but we have this in many other places. We have deforestation on the surroundings of indigenous lands. We have economic pressure over indigenous communities and leaders, and we have a very strong threats in terms of laws. There are some deputies and senators against indigenous people. They are trying to reverse all the rights that the indigenous peoples conquered in the Constitution. So this is the big picture in Brazil. Maybe other countries have different big pictures. And I will try to ask the question how university may collaborate, contribute to this process with regarding indigenous people's rights in Brazil. There are many possibilities. I'm talking here about 3 of these possibilities. The first one is, I believe, reinforcing the affirmative policies to bring young indigenous peoples to university. But not only opening space to them, but to have a welcome policy inside the universities, because most of these indigenous young people come from their communities, and the university environment is very rude, maybe aggressive sometimes to them. So the university, such as University of Brasilia, where I live in Brasilia, Brazil, may have some policies to welcome these students, and we can talk a little bit more about that. The second would be to incorporate and to develop some arrangements and procedures to bring the wise guys, the elders, the people from indigenous communities, to bring their knowledge and their science to university, to promote a dialogue between Western science and indigenous science as well. And we have some experiences in Brazil that we can also talk a little more about that. And finally, about incorporating some specific, very specific contents and methodologies and procedures in the university and how can I say, the courses, such as impact assessment, social, environmental, and human rights. They're very important to indigenous lands and to indigenous peoples, because it mediates the relationship with big enterprises outside their lands. Governance and political arrangements, because it's important to them with the decision-making processes, and also the governance is important to the free, prior, informed consent rights. It's very important. So university promote discussions and contents and knowledge about governance would be quite important. And in Brazil, many indigenous peoples has the consultation protocols, very interesting initiatives that we have in many places in Brazil. Okay. Also bring some knowledge about land and environmental management. It's very important to indigenous lands, because nowadays they have the fixed limits lands, so they have to survive in this new territoriality. So in Brazil, we have a public policy called National Policy on Environmental and Territorial Management, the PNGATI, and we have management plans for indigenous lands. This is very important tools to indigenous peoples, and to bring knowledge from the university to indigenous students, but also to non-indigenous about ethnomapping, climate change, and procedures to do this land management would be very important. And finally, management, institutional management to help indigenous organizations to empower themselves, to fight for their rights, to implement their projects. And also we have here in the COP, we discussed that, funds, some indigenous funds to promote ethno-development and measures to face climate change. That's it. Thank you. Obrigado. Salam alaikum.
Thank you, Cássio. Perfect timing. Now we have Paulo and Jaci coming. Thank you so much. So just introduce the two of them. Right, so we have here Paulo do Nascimento Galvão and Jaciara Souza de Vasconcelos. They are two leadership from Engaja Mundo, which is a youth organization. They're both from the Brazilian Amazon, and it's wonderful to have you here, and we would like to hear more about your experience. I know that the two of your universities are doing your studies, so about your experience as an indigenous person being in that context, that would be wonderful to hear. And we have the help of Heitor, who will be making the translation. Thank you so much. We start with Paulo. Okay, thank you.
Olá, bom dia. Muito feliz de estar aqui, prazer. Vindo compartilhar um pouco da minha experiência, mas também não só a minha experiência, acho que a experiência de outras pessoas.
Hi, I'm Paulo. I'm really happy to be here, not only bringing what I have to share, but experiences from other people that I know.
Eu acho que a gente chega, quando a gente tem acho que no nosso contexto, enquanto Brasil, enquanto, acho que povos indígenas também, a gente tem uma dificuldade muito grande no acesso, e aí não nada específico da comunidade dos povos indígenas, né? Mas no Brasil a gente tem um acesso de alguns grupos que é muito excludente na universidade. E aí eu acho que a gente precisa, primeiro, partir da perspectiva que a gente precisa pautar o acesso universal nesse espaço, e aí que ele seja universal não só na forma de entrar na universidade, na entrada, mas ele seja universal também na permanência, para fazer com que os povos indígenas e outras comunidades tradicionais, outras pessoas que, enfim, estão em espaço de vulnerabilidade, possam acessar esse espaço.
In Brazil, especially for indigenous people, it's really hard to have access to university. There are some groups that do this exclusion towards indigenous people, and we need to start from universal access to university, not only of getting the indigenous people in, but also on keeping them. So we need to have an universal approach to keeping folks inside the universities, so that other people, other indigenous populations can come and have that access.
E é um assunto importante, porque eu acho que a gente acessa a universidade, e aí muitas universidades no Brasil e no mundo como um todo têm um sistema de ensino que ele é pautado na ideia ocidental, né, na ideia branca de ensinar. E eu, particularmente, sou estudante de Relações Internacionais na Unesp de Franca, em São Paulo. E aí o Brasil também tem uma coisa que não sei se em outras partes do mundo tem, que é as cotas para acesso à universidade, não só as cotas, mas também políticas de permanência dentro da universidade. E isso possibilita que mais pessoas possam acessar a universidade e possam permanecer. Só que a gente também precisa de sistemas que façam que as pessoas acessem, permaneçam, mas também se enxerguem dentro desse espaço. Porque, particularmente no meu caso, o que eu vejo na universidade são autores brancos do norte global, muito assunto ocidentalizado, mas eu acho que todos os dias a gente pauta dentro da universidade, com o movimento estudantil e aí o movimento organizado, dentro do próprio movimento sociais, né, e aí seja indígena, enfim, de outras frentes de trabalho, a inclusão de assuntos e temas que são importantes, e a gente pauta muito a decolonialidade dentro desse espaço, né, da universidade, da gente conseguir, de fato, aprender de uma outra forma, olhar o sistema de aprendizado com uma outra forma e que não seja esse sistema branco, esse sistema ocidental.
So when you get to the university, the universities in Brazil are based in a system on the Western and white mindset or ways of teaching. Paulo specifically is studying international relations, and even though you have all the affirmative actions to get people inside the universities, when they got in there, they don't see themselves in the spaces, not with the teachers and not also with the authors that they are reading and studying. So most of the authors that Paulo have studied so far are white, from the global north and from the West. One thing that helps on fighting to change that are the youth movements, the students' movements, and social movements. They try to bring those themes like decolonization to the courses that they're in, and to try to learn another way, not the white Western way.
E acho que para encerrar, porque eu acho que eu já estou passando do tempo, mas e acho que uma coisa que a gente precisa entender e investir, e aí enquanto universidade, enquanto governos, enquanto, enfim, diversas frentes de trabalho, é que a gente produz muita coisa, a gente está na universidade, e aí o conhecimento ele não parte só da universidade, né? Ele parte também de dentro dos territórios. Então, a gente tem muito conhecimento, tem acesso a muita coisa, mas a gente precisa que esse acesso ele seja ampliado. Então, a gente só vai se ver dentro desse espaço, nas universidades, nos livros, nos textos, ser referência em alguma área, se a gente tiver o apoio, e aí, enfim, apoio do governo, apoio de outras entidades, para a gente acessar esse espaço e conseguir, enfim. A gente não consegue, por exemplo, fazer pesquisa, publicar e estar inserido naquele sistema da academia, porque também é um sistema violento, e a gente tem outras formas de entender e de se relacionar com esse espaço. Então, a gente precisa, de fato, com que esse sistema também, de alguma forma, consiga se adaptar às nossas demandas e consiga, de alguma forma, também fazer com que as nossas demandas cheguem em outros espaços. Então, eu acho que a ideia geral é fazer com que o acesso à educação ele seja universal e ele consiga também atingir as pessoas nas suas diferentes culturas, tanto na forma de pesquisar, quanto na forma de, enfim, explorar esse conhecimento e fazer com que esse conhecimento chegue em outras pessoas. Não essa forma que a gente tem escrita e tem que ser assim, tem que pesquisar durante muitos anos, revisar muita literatura, publicar muita coisa, assim, e ir para fazer exposição de trabalho em vários lugares. A gente não quer só isso. A gente quer trocar com as comunidades, a gente quer trocar com as pessoas que fazem, que criam teorias e que criam coisas dentro da academia, mas, sobretudo, as pessoas que têm os maiores e os melhores conhecimentos que estão dentro dos territórios. E a gente tem que conversar sobre isso e pautar sobre isso.
And to wrap up, we need to understand that the knowledge doesn't come only from university. It also comes from the communities. We need full access and universal access to university, on the books, on the articles, and we will only be able to get that if we move as a society in a whole. So with the government, with the universities, with the movements. The academic world is violent, and we need that system. We need that system to be able to adapt to our ways of living, also to our demands and our types of research. That's why we need universal access that embrace all cultures, not only universal access. We want more than just the symposiums and the Congress. We need to impact and affect the communities we live in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Paulo, for sharing your experience. We'll try to keep it short because we'll try to get some time for question and answers, but we'll hear from Jaciara now. Thank you so much.
Oi, eu sou Jaciara Borari, eu sou da aldeia de Alter do Chão, que fica no Pará, no Brasil. E eu sou estudante de antropologia dentro da Universidade Federal do Oeste do Pará. E eu estou dentro da universidade por causa das políticas para conseguir com que mais indígenas e quilombolas entrem nas universidades. Inclusive, a nossa universidade, a UFOPA, ela é referência entre as universidades no Brasil para que os alunos indígenas e quilombolas tenham acesso à educação de ensino superior. A gente tem o processo seletivo especial indígena e o processo seletivo especial quilombola, que é onde a gente consegue mais uma oportunidade, uma porta para conseguir com que esses alunos que já têm problema na educação, tanto de nível de ensino médio, então já chega numa parte onde chega com mais dificuldade para entrar dentro da universidade e, através dessa política, para conseguir entrar na universidade, a gente tem um pouquinho mais de chance de entrar para esse ensino superior.
I'm Jaciara. I'm from Alter do Chão village. It's in the Pará state in Brazil. I'm an anthropology student at UFOPA. UFOPA is the Federal University of Western Pará. Inside that university, she got to the university due to affirmative actions and processes that exist there, not only to indigenous, but also to quilombolas. Quilombolas, or just a parenthesis, is like original community from Brazil as well. Usually they were like built or by the enslaved people on the origins of Brazil. UFOPA is a reference among the universities in Brazil on having indigenous and quilombola folks. There is a special process, like a special SAT, to get indigenous and quilombolas people in. And Jaciara makes the statement that the issue on education for her community, it's not only on university, but it starts back then. It starts on basic education. So when they get to the time to do the process, they're not ready. That's why you also need a special process. And that policy is what made most of her friends also to get into university.
Com essa política de entrada na universidade, a gente também, como não é uma lei, a gente tem que lutar todos os anos para que permaneça esse processo seletivo. E também a gente começou, desde quando teve esse processo, a política de permanência dentro da universidade, onde, através de bolsas de estudo, faz com que os alunos permaneçam, saiam das suas aldeias e venham para morar na cidade. E, com essa bolsa, consegue se manter dentro da cidade. E aí tem mais um processo de racismo, de que tem que sair da sua aldeia e morar na cidade, bilíngue, tem que falar outra língua. Então, tem um processo bem grande de política de entrar e também de permanecer. E dentro da universidade, a gente tem a formação básica indígena, onde a gente entra na universidade e tem um ano para começar a se acostumar com a universidade, onde vai também estudar mais o português e a matemática, para que você, quando entre no seu curso, não fique atrasado dos demais, onde tiveram chances de estudar em escolas particulares e também ter um ensino mais avançado. E nas aldeias a gente tem um ensino bem precário, então, dentro da universidade, a gente conseguiu com que tivesse essa formação para que, quando os alunos entrassem, e entram até agora, eles não fiquem tão atrasados quanto os demais.
This policy is not given, so every year they need to fight to keep the policy to get indigenous and quilombola people in. one of the things that they have accomplished is also to get grants from the university so they can move from their towns, their villages, to the city, to the university. And that's part of racism that they see in academia, right? They take people out of their own culture and they ask them to speak more than one language that doesn't include the original languages that they speak. So they also fought to have an extra year. So the first year of university, they give extra classes on Portuguese language and also on mathematics for the indigenous and quilombola community. So when they get inside the courses and to the regular course, they're not like lagging in comparison to other people that had the chance or the opportunity and the money to do the private schools in Brazil that usually are the best ones.
E isso só é possível por causa das lutas dos movimentos indígenas que acontecem na região, já que, como não é uma lei, a gente precisa todos os dias e todos os anos lutar para que essa política ela permaneça e com que a gente não seja novamente excluído, já que a gente está no nosso território, a universidade está num território indígena, então a gente quer o básico, que é poder também ter acesso à educação.
And this is only made possible due to the fight from the indigenous movements in the region. Every day they need to fight and to do this resistance so that they still have that access and that they are not excluded from higher education. And she also mentions that the university is inside their territory and they need to have the access and the willing to get inside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulo, Jaciara, and Heitor as well for the fantastic translation. Thank you all of our, I'd like to thank all of our speakers here. But I would like to open the floor for questions as we have so many participants here this morning. And we can take advantage of having you here to ask any questions you may want to our speakers.
Hi, it's working. So my name is Maria. I'm Brazilian as well, and I'm sorry. Sorry that I get emotional. I see these speakers. I came here more to see what was the connection between the indigenous tribes and the universities. And I was in a very big question mark. Who will be here today? I live with the indigenous for 4 years of my life in the Amazon. I'm a vision coach for presidents of countries and family offices to manage wealth and fortune for the next 50 years, 100 years. I study in the best universities and the best schools. And I never get the knowledge that I get when I was with them. So when I see these two gentlemen talking about their experience with the indigenous, I'm really happy that you guys are talking this way, because I don't want to go again in a different direction. My question here, for what is the point, that you take the indigenous to the schools. Sorry, but I don't agree. It's opposite. They need to have their own universities, their own schools. And we, as white people that want to learn with them, we need to go there to learn. We need to go there to get the experience. Because they don't learn through the books. They learn from the experience that the elders talk to the youngers. And the youngers teach the elders how to continue the legacy that they born to live it. Because the most proud that the indigenous have is that he can keep the tradition. He can keep talking the origin of the world, the origin of the people. So my question is, how the universities, as you both are open, to help to create this kind of environment through the tele-education, for example, because this is what I'm doing since my 16 years old. with so many high-end people. And when I bring these presidents in silent, quietly, or head of family offices to be there 1 week, 1 day, or change their life completely. And then you get the knowledge that we know to apply in a way that all this COP is talking. I went to some speeches, it's a lot of talk, but the action, it's just come by experience. So my question is how you both believe that is the way to have these multiple billions of universities and schools of green education in the sites that they are, connected to the universities, and give them a diploma of notorium knowledge, because they are experienced in another level for something that we don't know. So this is my question, how both sides are open for this cooperation, and I'm happy to cooperate and to also get you guys if you are interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe Jacy or Paulo, would you like to address that question? One of you?
Usando a minha universidade como referência, né? E também dentro da minha aldeia a gente tem a primeira creche indígena, também tem a escola, nossa escola indígena, onde tem o Notório Saber, e também cada vez mais a universidade, que já é diferente, né? Mas dentro do Brasil a gente tem a UFOPA, a Universidade Federal do Oeste do Pará, e também referência a Universidade de Brasília, onde tem lugares, né, também com que receba os alunos, porque eles vão vir das aldeias, eles têm uma vivência diferente, eles moram em lugares diferentes, mas eles também querem ter o acesso ao estudo e ao ensino superior, porque também, se você tem todo esse conhecimento natural de dentro da aldeia, que é viver em harmonia com a natureza, você tem aquele conhecimento, mas se você não tiver o diploma, disso não serve nada para onde a gente vive. Então, a gente quer ter esse diploma para que o nosso conhecimento também que a gente já tem, ele valha de alguma coisa dentro desse lugar, desse espaço que a gente vive. Senão, não vale de nada o conhecimento que já existe. E também somar com a parte de ciências, eles querem fazer farmácia, querem fazer antropologia, arqueologia e vários outros cursos. Então, nós somos pessoas, nós queremos também o acesso a essa educação. Nós queremos estar. E aí também precisa, sim, do financeiro, que é muito importante. Dentro das aldeias, ninguém depende de... Tem diversos e diversos tipos de povos, tem diversas línguas, diversos tipos de culturas. Nós não somos só uma, nós temos vários tipos de cabelos, olhos diferentes. Então, a gente precisa se adaptar a cada universidade. E também ter esse conhecimento de que são diferentes. E ter esse apoio da universidade para que tenha essa permanência. E o financeiro, que é muito importante. Porque, senão, eles acabam voltando e a gente acaba ficando frustrado com o que acontece. Então, esse apoio para adentrar a universidade com o processo seletivo especial indígena e também a permanência com o financeiro das bolsas para que os alunos consigam se adaptar à cidade. E também tem a parte de que os professores também precisam entender a dificuldade que, às vezes, dos alunos terem educações diferentes. Então, tem que ter toda essa compreensão de um coletivo dentro da universidade.
Using my university as a reference and the place where I live, Jaciara's village has the first indigenous kids school kindergarten and also the first indigenous school for the young folks. Inside Brazil, we have two references, UFOPA, the Federal University of Western Pará, and also UNB, which is the National University of Brasília, the capital of Brazil, as reference for indigenous policies. They are references because they have this way of receiving the students and also getting them used to a different culture because they come from different places. They need to enter this system, this academic system we have in, because their knowledge that is not worth without a diploma in the world that we live in. So they need to make the merge between the two worlds, so their knowledge have this notoriety that it's needed. And there's also other courses, and they're not one only indigenous people. That's important to highlight. They're different. They have different types of people, of hair, of languages, and there are different types of knowledges as well. They want to have access to all types of educations. And when they don't get this inclusion, they feel the frustration, and that gets them excluded for trying it again. They, in a nutshell, they need support to get in and to stay. They need money to adapt coming to the city, and also this to get to understand the new culture that they're getting in. And lastly is teachers also need to have the empathy with indigenous populations and indigenous people that are coming into the universities.
Thank you so much. Some more questions?
Hi, my name is Luis, also Brazilian. I just want to get a view of all of you. Anybody who wants to talk about as we're talking about incorporation of indigenous people and knowledge into higher education. The system of higher education for most countries is also a system of access. Depending on the university, on the degree, is just something that some people even just buy, so they can have access to higher paid wages, higher paid institutions. Speaking of, Sorbonne, originally French university, you can remember Bourdieu, who he did a whole study about how these cultural milestones are necessary for you to ascend. So seeing that in a system that values only one kind of knowledge, their access to the indigenous access to their own knowledge, it doesn't serve as the same metric for access to higher paid wages, paid jobs, as we discussed here before. What is your view on the integration of indigenous professors, as to add a new perspective, but not teaching our subjects, but teaching probably their own experience and knowledge into higher education? And what is your view on the creation of, I guess, an indigenous curriculum with, certified degrees and certified departments of universities? How far away are we from that? How much interest there is on that from your experiences as researcher, as a person who lives with the communities, and how interesting we feel like that would be for the indigenous people everywhere, not only in Brazil, Africa, even in parts of Europe as well. This is something that really interests me to understand more.
Thank you. I'll probably let Professor Maki and Cássio too.
Well, a very good question and a complex one, because there's many dimensions to it. I mean, I think it's really important to understand that, and if you think about the example I was drawing on from Australia, I mean, we're talking about traditional knowledge that's very place-based with a particular community. Much of it is it's sacred knowledge that can't be shared. A lot of it's gendered. There are knowledge holders who are women and knowledge holders who are men, and a lot of it's accessed through ceremonies and the like. So when we talk that, not all of that can be taught to everyone in a university course, right? But I think there's certainly, speaking academically, that there's a urgent need to bring Indigenous epistemologies into academia, and in fact, it's a problem. I'm a scientist, right? But I work in a very interdisciplinary way, and I've got a lot of experience working with many disciplines. And academics are always falling over each other's epistemologies, right? Like, scientists are the worst. They don't even know the word epistemology, right? Like, they don't even realise that, the role of scientific theory and the construction of scientific knowledge. They don't understand that there's other epistemologies. They don't understand there's a limit to kind of reduction physicalism and things like this. So to me, there's enormous value in bringing into our tertiary education system, you know, a much deeper study of epistemologies and different knowledge systems. And that's one way of enabling people to understand the fact that traditional knowledge systems are knowledge systems, right? And that we can learn from them in the same, you know, in the same sense that we can learn from the humanities and the sciences, and that these are different knowledge systems. So that's one thing. A second, and that's what I was trying to get at, because I'm also an applied scientist, you know, you try and apply that scientific knowledge to help solve practical problems in the real world. That's the post-normal science kind of epistemology. Well, that's where that's where the knowledge of the practitioners, right, and that practical aspect of the traditional knowledge that's place-based is essential, right? You can't solve problems in the real world without that knowledge. So that's another way in which that can be brought into an academic curriculum. And there's a third way I mentioned. It's I'm not sure if it's happening in other countries, but in Australia there's about I'm trying to think of the exact number. We might have we have a very large protected area network, right? It's very big. It's about, I think, about 160 million hectares. Half of that is Indigenous protected areas, Indigenous territory, under this national scheme where they make a determination that they wish to be part of this protected area scheme, and in return they get various resources and things and capacity building. One of the programs is what's called an Indigenous Ranger program, which is a program for youth which takes that two-toolbox approach. They work with their knowledge holders on country, and they learn modern methods of land management and conservation, and it's a graduated, formally recognised qualification. There are kind of 3 levels. It's tertiary, but it's pre-university. So there are 3 certification levels, but that also gives you a pathway to tertiary, where there's tertiary studies as well. So in terms of at least the kind of land conservation, sea conservation area, and integrating that with traditional knowledge, that's proven, you know, really popular and you know, a good practical case study. So they're kind of 3 ways that I can see this happening, or what you're asking for.
Thank you, Brandon. Cássio, would you like to?
Ok. Luiz, vou falar em português, se o Heitor depois puder me ajudar a tradução em inglês para poder conversar mais diretamente com meus colegas. Então, Luiz, eu acho que é uma questão, assim, como a Jaci falou, é uma luta diária a cada dia, e as conquistas, elas são pequenos passos, né? Termos bem concretos, assim, tentando entender o que você está perguntando, né? Tem experiências muito reais e concretas. Por exemplo, no UNB, em Brasília, tem um programa de pós-graduação, que é o MESPT, né? Eles convidam sábios, sábias, sabedores, xamãs indígenas, quilombolas, inclusive faleceu o Nego Bispo, um grande liderança quilombola semana passada, né? Foi professor no MESPT, né? Que é trazer esses indígenas, quilombolas e comunidades tradicionais para dentro da universidade, mesmo sem um título universitário, para poder dar aulas tanto para estudantes indígenas quanto, muito importante, para os não indígenas, né? É aquela ideia de indigenizar a universidade, da mesma forma que tem a indigenização da política e de outros espaços, né? Então, resumidamente, acho que tem que ser investido, e não é uma coisa fácil, né? Porque você tem barreiras dentro das universidades, nas reitorias, né? Você tem que convencer. Então, trazer esse conteúdo com experiências muito concretas e reais é bem importante. Como essa experiência do MESPT, a gente tem outras experiências no Brasil, né, em outros lugares do mundo, mas eu vou ficar por aqui porque o tempo é curto.
I'll speak in Portuguese, and then he was speaking Portuguese and I'll translate. It's a daily fight, like Jaci was mentioning, and in baby steps. We have concrete and real experiences in Brazil. One of them is a post-graduation program that exists at UNB. UNB is the National University of Brasilia, where they call in those indigenous and quilombolas genius and knowledge experts, subject matter experts inside the universities, even without them having a degree or a diploma, so they can give master classes and teach people indigenous, and most importantly to the non-indigenous inside the university. There is a term that he's saying that is we have to indigenize the universities, make them more indigenous. And even though we have all those barriers to get into the university, to keep them in, bringing that content to be taught from inside the universities is really important.
And I forgot to mention another development that's happened in all Australian universities is that mine and all others, I think, have now got a, do you call them vice-chancellors or presidents in the Sorbonne? Is your vice-chancellor? Yeah. So there's a deputy vice-chancellor for Indigenous in every Australian university, and in my university they oversee Indigenous students. There's a program to facilitate, enable, and I think my university has the largest percentage of Indigenous students in any Australian university, which is very good. But also they have programs for all academics that all academics have to do to be like Indigenous or competent to be able to do in order to do research with Indigenous people or that involve Indigenous people, you have to do these, cultural kind of training courses. And part of that is any research that in any way involves Indigenous Australians, they have to be co-project researchers. So it can't be just an advisory role. So, for example, I had a new federally funded project just starting to look at help develop a community-centred climate adaptation project for biodiversity in the northern rivers of New South Wales. And there's an Indigenous alliance there called the Jagoon Alliance, and the director of that is co-project research director, right? So that's part of the research protocol. Was I just don't consult with him. I actually formally made him, co-project director, and all decisions about what research is done and how money is spent is done, is decided kind of jointly. So that's it's a big change in research protocol.
I think we have time for one last question. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Ray. I'm a student from NYU Abu Dhabi, and I'm taking some classes on post-colonial term this semester, and I'm really wondering it's also similar to what you mentioned about the materials from the Western world that the global North kind of perspective on the Indigenous people. So I was wondering if we jump out of the schools within the Indigenous areas, if we think about for example, schools at UAE or schools in the States, in the Western world, is there any way for them to incorporate this kind of programs or educations that kind of do more authentic studies on Indigenous people? So yeah, jump out of the Orientalism perspective. I know it's kind of hard, but yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe, yeah? Paulo Jaci, would you like to comment on that?
Hoje, inclusive, já depois dessa bastante luta de vários anos para os indígenas estarem dentro da universidade formados, nós temos professores formados, né? Então, também tem muitos escritores, e agora a gente precisa muito dessa luta de que a gente precisa se ver dentro da universidade, né? Aprender com professores que a gente já viu se formar, indígenas, a gente se reconhecer quanto eles, mas também nos autores, a gente que está dentro da universidade já é difícil de ver, imagine para fora. Mas que também vem muito dessa nossa luta de muito tempo, mas que a gente precisa, que essas políticas, né, precisam mudar os livros, mudar os nossos próprios livros também, desde o ensino do ensino básico, o ensino médio, porque hoje a gente ainda vê de que forma que os alunos aprendem como é que o Brasil, ou quando é que o Brasil foi descoberto, sabe, coisas básicas que a gente sabe que não foi desse jeito, né, que foi invasão, que foi genocídio e acontece até hoje, mas que a gente está lutando por isso, né, vários alunos tá aqui andando aqui nessa COP, acho que foi possível ver cara a cara uma delegação muito grande de indígenas dentro dessas conferências que eram bem difíceis. Então, a gente está querendo e pedindo que a gente esteja nesses espaços, esteja nesses lugares que são de direitos nossos. Então, a gente quer também que os nossos livros, que nossos autores, que nossas histórias reais, que a gente está contando nós por nós, né? Que a gente não precisa mais dessas histórias de quando foram ao Brasil ou quando foram na Amazônia e acharam povo tal e povo tal. A gente já tem histórias novas, com escritores novos contando. Nós somos esse povo, nós vivemos desse jeito, essas são as nossas aldeias. Então, a gente precisa também que as universidades, mas que também os governos, que vá na parte do Ministério da Educação também, para que a gente vá batalhar essas coisas que a gente já vem batalhando há muito tempo, que, inclusive, me referindo aqui à COP, que é promessas e promessas, e todos os anos promessas e promessas, e eu vou diminuir aquilo, vou diminuir isso, eu vou ajudar os povos, vou ajudar na demarcação das suas terras, vou ajudar aquilo, e, no final, acaba a conferência e nada disso acontece. Continuam matando, continuam explorando, continuam negando a educação, porque não é fácil ter esse acesso e permanência à educação. Porque, além da gente querer estudar, a gente precisa, ao mesmo tempo, batalhar para estar vivo dentro das nossas terras, lutar para que as nossas terras continuem sendo nossas, para que a gente continue vivendo nossas terras. Então, uma luta atrás da outra que se junta, né? Nós estamos aqui dentro de uma conferência para falar de educação porque elas são coisas que se interligam. E a gente precisa mais desses apoios de outros países, porque é assim que a gente faz, né? E a gente precisa, assim como na Austrália, a gente já fez intercâmbio, inclusive, na nossa aldeia com aborígenes da Austrália, que são nossos parentes também, que também estão em vários processos, que tiveram a colonização, que eles estão também reaprendendo a sua língua de novo. Então, a gente quer e a gente precisa que essas políticas sejam políticas públicas para que esses nossos livros eles estejam lá dentro, desde o ensino básico até o ensino superior.
So after the huge fight, to have indigenous at the universities, we got to get more professors with their degrees, and they're teaching and giving classes in all levels, from basic education to higher education. We have authors and professors, and we are being able to recognize and see ourselves inside those spaces. Even though we need a lot more, this has been evolving. Those policies need also to change, and these public policies need also to change the books from basic education to higher education. The ways that the history of Brazil are taught are still really wrong. For example, that Brazil was wrongly and falsely discovered, and not that there was an invasion and a genocide of the indigenous population in that land. Walking on this COP, you could see the huge delegation of indigenous people that we brought in, and that's an example of us getting into occupying these new spaces. We need to be there in those decision-making places. We have our stories, and we need to tell them, and not others talking about us. We are used to having, to reading about someone that went to the Amazon and that found a specific people, but we are that specific people, and we can say our story through our lenses. The university and the governments and the ministries, like the education ministry, they need to stop doing like they are doing here at COP. There are a bunch of promises, and they're not acting in the end. It's not easy for us, because beyond studying, we need to fight to be alive. We need to fight for the right to have our own lands, and it's just a fight after another fight. We are here at this climate conference talking about education because education is transversal to what we do. We need also that exchange between indigenous people. Jassi was mentioning that they had an exchange program with some Australian Aborigines people as well, and that could be a public policy. We need to be in the books, we need to be in the articles, we need to be in the common knowledge with our stories through our lenses.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all of our speakers for this fantastic sharing here. Now let us give a round of applause to all of our speakers, and thank you very much again.